I do think the war was a launching pad for women's liberation. Rosie the Riveter was a real thing. Women found out they could do it. They could earn good money. They could drive streetcars. There was never a female streetcar operator in San Francisco until the war. This was really a turning point, and I think for the good. Don Baldwin, San Francisco. Rosie the Riveter's image radically changed how women thought about themselves, taking them out of the home and into the working world, bringing about one of the most important developments in the history of women. After the Depression in 1929, 10 million Americans were unemployed. Although the United States tried to stay out of the war in World War II, when Pearl Harbor was attacked in 1941, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt declared that the United States would enter the war against the Axis powers. Because of the war, a lot of things were in short supply. Food and other items were rationed.
Oh, there was enormous changes in the Second World War. There were ration books, and there was limited supply of gasoline, and everybody was collecting all the cans to recycle and newspapers to recycle, and supposed to have your shoes resold and not have to buy new ones. It was a true national mobilization, and most everybody was going in the same direction.
People were encouraged to collect metals and rubber and other materials to make war items. Millions of men eventually enlisted in the U.S. Armed Services between 1941 and 1945. Women left at home by their husbands and fathers were needed to fill jobs more than ever. As industries emptied of manpower and demand for defense products increased, the government called on women to take the jobs left vacant by men.
Those women who were doing low-wage housework and nanny work went into these higher-wage factories.
It's just fantastic. You wouldn't believe some of the things that we were earning in.
Government committees in charge of information and propaganda began to produce literature and images to encourage women to enter factories and take up these traditionally male jobs.
Well, that was the start of women going into man's work a lot.
As industry filled with women, the image of women began to change. In 1943, the song Rosie the Riveter began to pop up everywhere in jukeboxes.
All the day long, whether rain or shine, she's a part of the assembly line. She's making history, working for victory. Rosie the Riveter keeps a sharp lookout for sabotage, sitting up there on the fuselage. That little frail can do more than a male can do. Rosie.
It was a 3-minute song by Red Evans and John Jacob Loeb. The song lyrics said that women factory workers were making history, that they were working harder than men, but because they loved the men at the front. Rosie's protecting Charlie, her Marine, on the front. Women workers were also protecting the homeland by keeping a sharp lookout for sabotage, so factory work for women was very red, white, and blue. Then, Norman Rockwell's illustration of a woman factory worker with a lunchbox labeled Rosie, which was printed on the front cover of the May 29, 1943 edition of the Saturday Evening Post, became one of the 2 iconic Rosie the Riveter images. The other image, that is very famous today, is from the poster produced in 1942 at Westinghouse for the government, titled, "We Can Do It." The 2 images communicated different ideas about working women. The "We Can Do It" poster showed a much more traditionally attractive woman, while the Norman Rockwell woman was dirty and muscular. After Rockwell's image appeared, the press began to highlight women factory workers named Rose or Rosie. A riveter named Rose Monroe from Michigan made films for the government. Then she made a commercial movie called Rosie the Riveter. In 1943, Ginger Rogers and Ruth Hussey starred in the film Tender Comrade, about 4 Rosies who start a democratic commune while their husbands are in the army. These images blended traditional ideas of femininity with women workers' new roles. Rosie the Riveter changed how women thought about themselves, contributing to one of the most important changes in the history of women, their entry into the workforce. Through 1945, women continued to pour into the paid workforce, from secretarial work to building ships and planes. They earned good wages and joined the unions, which began to admit women. Employment had a transformative effect on women's lives, who began to see themselves as independent of men. Employment was not equally liberating for all women, however. Some poor women had always had to work outside the home. For them, this was nothing new. Black women continued to be paid less than white women and were treated worse at work. Some women thought that even when the men returned, they would still be able to work, while other women were ready to return to their kitchens.
I was ready to leave. In fact, we were going to have vacation at that time, and I had put in that I was leaving because I had bought my own shop down in Willimantic at that time. So I was leaving right at the end of World War II.
When the soldiers returned, many women were fired, and there was strong social pressure for them to go back home.
Everybody was laid off at that time.
And so in my junior and senior year, which is 47 and 48, there were men on campus who came to take classes. That was a consequence of the war situation, that they had all of these men coming back and they had passed this GI Bill of Rights, which the consequence was that it was not easy to get into a medical school because there were lots of GIs competing. That was a problem for Rosie the Riveter, the jobs shrunk, and what was she equipped to do? Marry a GI and have a family?
The government propaganda agencies also produced ads to encourage women to let men have their jobs. Just as the government had before tried to create the image of femininity to encourage women workers, they were now trying to reshape the understanding of femininity to discourage women in the workplace. But some stayed in the workforce because they had no choice. Others that were forced to leave worked as waitresses or at boring jobs, at a quarter of the pay that they had earned in the factories. For many women, Rosie the Riveter has remained an important symbol. Today, there is a national Rosie the Riveter Association, a Rosie the Riveter Park, oral history projects, and Rosie the Riveter images are some of the most famous images in the world. They appear on mugs, t-shirts, postcards, and posters. Some believe that women's work participation in World War II, encouraged by the Rosie the Riveter image, started the women's movement that exploded in the 1960s.
The Rosie the Riveter image was one of many influences that led me to understand that women could be professionals.
In 1950, only 1/3 of women worked outside the home, while today, 60% do. Today, almost half of all workers are women. Men's and women's work remained very separate until the 1960s, with separate columns in the employment ads for men's jobs and women's jobs. Today, women have entered many traditionally male jobs, such as medicine, law, and transportation. But one place where they remain rare since World War II is in the kind of traditionally male technical and trade jobs the Rosies had. In 2000, only 9% of women were employed in precision production, craft, and repair jobs, or as operators, fabricators, and laborers. Another consequence of women entering the workforce in World War II were the first efforts to pay women equally for their work. In 1942, the National War Labor Board urged employers to make adjustments which equalize wage or salary rates paid to females with the rates paid to males for comparable quality and quantity of work on the same or similar operations. Most employers didn't want to, and since they didn't have to, they didn't. Women continued to be paid less for doing the exact same job after the war. But in 1963, on June 10th, Congress passed the Equal Pay Act, which made it illegal to pay women less than men based on only their gender. The U.S. Supreme Court has extended the act in rulings that employers can't pay women less just by giving their job a different title or by arguing that the labor market pays women less. To this day, however, traditionally female jobs continue to pay less well than men's jobs. For instance, clerical work has been paid less than janitorial work. Today, women are still paid only 76% of men's wages. Many women also find that their promotion at the workplace is stopped by a glass ceiling of sexist expectation and biases. As women struggled to enter the workforce and be paid justly since the 1960s, Rosie has become an ever more important symbol for many. The government campaign to solve a temporary labor shortage created an image which has become a lasting symbol of women's struggle for justice.